"Don't buy anything, it's too expensive," she said. Her voice was loud enough for half the airport lounge to hear. She didn't whisper it. No, she wanted people to hear. She wanted strangers to look at me the way she did, as if I were a beggar who had somehow slipped into a palace. I smiled, just faintly. Because if I had opened my mouth, my son would have seen the storm inside me. And I didn't want him to. We were standing near the duty-free section of the airport. Bright lights, polished floors, glass shelves filled with perfumes that cost more than a month's salary for some families. My daughter-in-law's heels clicked, confidently on the marble, her designer bag swinging proudly on her arm. She leaned closer to my son, pretending to speak only to him, but making sure I could hear every single word. She doesn't need to buy anything. These brands are for people who understand class. She's too old-fashioned. Her words cut sharper than knives. I watched my son's face. He looked away, uncomfortable, but said nothing. His silence stung more than her insult. I wanted to ask him, "Don't you remember who paid for your first shoes? Don't you remember the nights I stayed awake, sewing clothes under a dim lamp so you could go to school in a clean uniform? Don't you remember how many meals I skipped so you would never sleep hungry? But I stayed quiet. Instead, I smiled again. That small, faint smile that always seemed to irritate her. And just as I expected, she noticed it. Her eyes narrowed. She raised her voice now, laughing in that way people do when they're mocking someone. Maybe she thinks she can afford these perfumes. Poor thing doesn't realize some bottles cost more than she's probably ever had in her hands. A few strangers turned their heads. Some looked embarrassed for me. Others smirked. I lowered my eyes and kept walking. My silence wasn't weakness. It was patience. A patience she would never understand. My son tried to change the subject. "Let's just get some coffee before the flight," he said softly. But she ignored him. "No, I want to look at the luxury section first. These things don't exist in her world. Let her at least see what real class looks like." And with that, she pulled him toward the handbag section. I followed behind them, slowly. My steps were unhurried, though my heart was heavy. As they admired a bag worth thousands of dollars, I stood a little apart, pretending to look at a row of watches. My fingers brushed the glass, not because I wanted to buy one, but because it gave me something to do while their voices echoed in my ears. "She'll never fit into our circle," my daughter-in-law said, lowering her tone slightly. "People, like her, they're only a burden. You need to stop wasting money on her. We're starting our own life now." My son didn't answer. He shifted uncomfortably, but again, silence. Always silence. That silence told me more than words ever could. I remembered when he was little, how he used to grip my hand tightly in crowded markets, afraid of losing me. How he used to say, "Don't worry, Mama. When I grow up, I'll protect you." And now? He stood beside his wife, listening as she ridiculed me, unable or unwilling to speak. The pain was sharp, but I had carried heavier burdens before. This too I would carry. I let my feet guide me away from them. Toward the perfume counter. The scent in the air was intoxicating. Roses, jasmine, sandalwood, musk. I inhaled deeply, letting it wash over me. As I stood there, the staff at the counter glanced at me. One of them whispered something to another. Then, in an instant, their expressions changed. But I said nothing. Not yet. Behind me, my daughter-in-law's laughter rang out again. She had spotted me at the counter. "Oh, look," she said loudly. "Maybe she's planning to buy something. Should I tell her the price so she doesn't faint?" A few passengers chuckled under their breath. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Because the storm she feared, the one behind my faint smile, was about to break. But that moment, that reveal, that silence turned into power. That comes later. For now I let her laugh. I let her believe she had won. Because the sweetest revenge is not in shouting, not in arguing, not in proving her wrong with words. It is in watching her face when she realizes the truth. So I smiled again, just faintly, and this time I saw something flicker in her eyes, annoyance, confusion, a tiny, restless fear. Because deep down, she knew. Silence is never empty. Sometimes silence hides secrets too heavy for words. I walked away slowly, my steps, measured, unhurried. To anyone watching, I must have looked like an old woman wandering aimlessly, pretending to pass time. I touched a row of perfume bottles, my fingers grazing the cool glass. The names shone in gold letters, each promising elegance, wealth, and power. My daughter-in-law believed those bottles defined class. She believed price tags defined worth. But I knew better. Worth is not in what you wear. It's in what you endure as. I moved from perfumes to watches. I let myself remember. Memories came uninvited. The years since my son's marriage. The first time she mocked me was at my own dining table. I had cooked for them, my son's favorite dishes, yet she wrinkled her nose, whispering just loud enough, so oily, so cheap, so outdated. He didn't defend me then either. He looked down at his plate and stayed silent. I swallowed the insult with my food. The second time was at a family gathering. She introduced me to her friends with a laugh. This is his mother. She doesn't really fit in with our lifestyle, but she tries. They laughed politely. I smiled faintly, and so it continued. Year after year. Each time I told myself, be patient, for the sake of your son, for the sake of peace. But patience, when stretched too far, turns into something else, something sharper. I paused at a shelf of glittering handbags. My reflection stared back at me from the glass. I saw my wrinkles, the gray strands in my hair, the tiredness in my eyes, and yet, behind all that, I saw strength. Strength she couldn't see. Strength my son had forgotten. Behind me, I could still hear her voice, sharp and careless, like broken glass. Honestly, I don't know why she even bothers walking around here. She should just sit quietly somewhere. These brands aren't for her kind. Her words didn't hurt me anymore, not the way they once did, because inside I was holding a secret she could never imagine. As I stood quietly, the staff at the counter noticed me. At first, it was just a glance, then a whisper. One leaned toward another. Their eyes flickered in my direction again. I didn't move. I simply shifted slightly, pretending to examine the leather of a handbag. The whispers continued. One of them picked up a phone. Another adjusted her uniform nervously. Something was stirring. Something my daughter-in-law didn't notice. She was too busy admiring herself in a mirror, holding up sunglasses worth more than what some families earn in months. "Do you think this suits me?" she asked my son loudly, striking a pose. He smiled weakly, nodding. Neither of them saw the way the staff looked at me. Neither of them noticed the quiet respect, no, reverence, in their eyes. I walked on, slowly, past rows of designer watches. Each tick of the second hand seemed louder than usual. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Time. That was all I had given them all these years. Time to see my worth. Time to remember the sacrifices. And time was almost up. I moved toward the jewelry counter. The diamonds sparkled under the lights, cold and brilliant. I remembered the first time I saw real diamonds. Not here, not in a store, but in the hands of a client whose account I once managed in silence, hidden behind papers and contracts. No one knew, not even my son. While she mocked me for being poor and outdated, she never realized the life I had built quietly, patiently, away from her eyes. I could sense the tension building, though no one else around seemed aware of it. The staff whispered again, one gesturing discreetly toward me. Another nodded quickly and disappeared into the back room. A part of me wanted to smile wider, but I didn't. I kept that same faint smile, the one that irritated her, the one that unsettled her, even if she couldn't explain why. My daughter-in-law's laughter rang out again. Maybe she thinks if she looks long enough, someone will feel sorry and gift her something. A few strangers chuckled. But then I noticed something, the same. Strangers, after laughing, glanced at me again, not mockingly but curiously, as if they too had sensed something in the air. I walked a little farther, stopping near a luxury watch brand's display. I placed my hand lightly on the glass. The staff at the counter hurried forward. Their steps were quick, deliberate. I didn't. Look at them. Not yet, because timing matters. Inside, my heart was steady, not nervous, not angry, steady. Years of swallowing insults had taught me control. Years of silence had taught me patience, and now, all of it would pay off. Behind me, my daughter-in-law grew restless. She's been wandering like a lost child. It's embarrassing. Her voice was sharper now, less mocking, more irritated. Because, deep down, she felt it, the unease, the shift. My silence was no longer weakness. It was something else, and she didn't know what. As I moved toward the counter again, one of the staff members stepped forward respectfully. She leaned closer, whispering just enough for me to hear. "Madam, shall we prepare the lounge?" Didn't answer. I simply gave her the faintest nod. The words had slipped out quietly, unnoticed by my daughter-in-law, who was still busy flaunting handbags in front of my son. But soon, she would notice. I walked on, slowly, as though nothing had happened. Yet inside me, the suspense coiled tighter, ready to spring. This wasn't just about perfumes or handbags. It wasn't about who could afford what. It was about years of humiliation. It was about silence finally speaking. And though I hadn't spoken a word yet, my daughter-in-law's victory was already slipping from her hands. She just didn't know it. Not yet. I could hear her heels clicking against the polished airport floor as she pulled my son toward another store. "Come, look at this one," she exclaimed, her voice sharp and high, like glass striking marble. They entered a luxury boutique filled with bright lights, polished mirrors, and handbags arranged like trophies. I stayed behind, my steps slower, deliberate. From where I stood, I could see her reflection in the mirror, her chin raised, her smile wide, her eyes searching not for beauty, but for validation. "See? This is what rich people buy," she said loudly, lifting a handbag with both hands as if it were some priceless relic. "Not the cheap clothes your mother wears." Her laughter echoed through the store. A few strangers turned their heads. Some smiled uncomfortably. Others looked at me with pity. But she didn't care. That was her way. She needed witnesses for her cruelty. My son shifted uneasily beside her. He ran his hand through his hair, his gaze darting between her, the bag, and the floor. "Maybe we should," he began softly, but she cut him off. "Don't tell me you don't like it. This is real elegance. Imagine me walking into a party with this on my arm. People would know immediately. We belong to a different class." She turned slightly, her voice rising again so it would carry. "Across the store, not like the simple outfits your mother insists on wearing." Her eyes flicked toward me briefly, sharp, mocking, then turned back to my son, as if I were nothing more than a shadow. I smiled faintly. She hated that smile, because it was not the reaction she wanted. She wanted me to flinch, to lower my head, to look ashamed. But I didn't, and that unsettled her more than if I had argued back. "Do you see the stitching? The leather?" she continued, almost lecturing him now. "This is what separates us from them." She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. Every word was sharpened deliberately, every syllable dipped in disdain. My son's voice dropped to a whisper. "Enough, people are looking," she tilted her head, feigning innocence. "What? I'm only telling the truth." "She doesn't understand these things." Someone has to show you the difference between real class and... Her gaze flicked toward me again. Pretending. Inside me, there was no anger, only silence. Because I knew something she didn't, and that knowledge was heavier than any insult she could throw. She handed the bag to the saleswoman and said, loudly, "We'll take this one." The saleswoman smiled politely, but hesitated, glancing briefly at me before ringing up the purchase. That hesitation didn't escape my notice. It never does. My daughter-in-law walked around the store, pointing at things with an air of authority. "These shoes are handcrafted. Look at the price tag, darling. Isn't it amazing? Of course they're expensive. That's the point. Only people of status can afford them." She lifted a pair of sunglasses, placed them on her face, and struck a pose in front of the mirror. "Now, this is what wealth looks like," she announced. Her laughter rang out again. My son gave a weak smile, not daring to contradict her. He never did. I walked slowly to the edge of the store, my fingers brushing the polished glass counters. Inside, glittering jewelry sparkled under the lights. It reminded me of a time long ago when wealth wasn't worn for the world to see, but handled quietly, in silence, in contracts, in sealed envelopes, in keys and ledgers. That was the difference between us. She measured wealth by what could be displayed. I measured it by what could be sustained. I watched her continue her performance. She picked up another handbag and pressed it against her shoulder. "See? Can you imagine your mother carrying this? No, she wouldn't even know how to hold it." Her voice was loud, triumphant. She wanted strangers to laugh with her. She wanted my son to nod in agreement. She wanted me to shrink into invisibility. But instead, I stood still, unmoved. The silence between my son and me grew heavier. He shifted again, looking toward the exit. "Maybe we should go. We'll be late for the gate." But she wasn't done. Not yet. Late? For what? Sitting in economy with everyone else? We're not in a rush. We should enjoy this. After all, people should know we can afford it. Her words dripped with pride. Pride built not on her own strength, but on what she thought she had taken possession of. She still didn't know the truth. Not yet. A young couple entered the store, holding hands. They stood nearby, quietly looking at wallets. My daughter-in-law glanced at them, then raised her voice louder, ensuring they heard. Of course, you can always tell who belongs where. Some people wander into these stores, but you can tell they're just looking. They'll never buy. Her eyes slid deliberately toward me. The couple shifted uncomfortably. The saleswoman behind the counter kept her gaze lowered, though I could see the faint tightening of her jaw. Even strangers could feel the cruelty in her words. But still, I remained silent, because silence is not always weakness. Sometimes silence is the sound of patience, waiting for the perfect moment. My daughter-in-law placed another item on the counter. "We'll take this too. And this one." She turned to my son. "Don't worry about the price. If you want to live like rich people, you have to spend like rich people. You should know that by now." My son gave a strained nod, avoiding my eyes. I watched him carefully. Once he used to look at me with pride, with love. Now he couldn't even look at me at all. The bags were packed, the purchases lined up neatly. My daughter-in-law stood taller, prouder, satisfied with her little performance. She turned back to me one final time. "See, Mother? This is what real status feels like." Her smile was wide, but her eyes, I noticed, searched mine desperately, waiting for a reaction. But all she got was the same faint smile, and that faint smile unsettled her more than any argument ever could, because behind that smile she couldn't see the storm that was quietly gathering, not yet, but soon, very soon. Her laughter still echoed in the boutique as we stepped out, her arms heavy with glossy shopping bags. My son trailed behind her, silent, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. I walked a little apart from them, my steps steady, my face calm. Every word she had spoken still lingered in the air. See? This is what real status feels like. Your. Mother wouldn't even know how to hold it. But I did not answer, not because I had no words, but because words were unnecessary. As we moved past the bright storefronts, I let my eyes wander. My daughter-in-law was still talking, her voice rising and falling like a performance rehearsed too many times. "People notice," she said, adjusting the strap of her new handbag proudly. "When you wear the right things, walk into the right places, people treat you differently." My son gave her a small nod, but his shoulders were tight. He was uncomfortable, but he said nothing. He rarely did. I walked a little slower, allowing their words to drift over me like wind. My silence was not emptiness. It was memory. I remembered the gold bangles I once wore, heirlooms from my mother, passed down with blessings. They glittered on my wrists when I first got married. They were my treasure, my pride. I sold them when my son's tuition fees were due. One by one, each bangle left my hand, replaced with stamped receipts. I remember watching the shopkeeper weigh them, the clink of gold against brass, the hollow ache in my chest. But I smiled when I handed the money to the school office, because my son's education meant more than ornaments ever could. I remembered the nights I stayed awake, stitching clothes, under a single bulb while the house slept. My hands cramped, my eyes burned, but I kept going. Every coin earned went to his books, his meals, his future. He never knew how many meals I skipped so he could eat better. He never knew how many times I went without a new shawl so he could wear clean uniforms. And I never told him, because sacrifice, when it is true, does not announce itself. Now, years later, his wife mocked me for the same simplicity that once built his life. And yet, I remained silent, because dignity does not argue. Dignity endures. We passed by perfumes, leather goods, glittering watches displayed like trophies. My daughter-in-law stopped often, touching, pointing, boasting, I observed quietly. Her pride was in display. Mine was in silence. As they lingered near another window, I drifted toward a quieter corner of the duty-free hall. A fragrance counter gleamed softly under warm lights. Rows of perfumes lined the shelves, each bottle sculpted like glass art, catching the glow in shades of amber, silver, and rose. The air was filled with soft floral notes, subtle yet commanding. Walked closer, my fingers brushing the cool glass of a bottle. The saleswoman behind the counter looked up and smiled politely. Unlike the others, she didn't look past me. She looked at me, directly, kindly. For a moment, I simply stood there, breathing in the delicate scents, letting them settle over me like a veil. Behind me, my daughter-in-law's voice still carried, loud, sharp, demanding. Here, it was different. Here, it was quiet. I picked up a bottle, tested the scent on a paper strip, and closed my eyes briefly. The fragrance was warm, elegant, understated, but lasting, much like the life I had lived. I placed the strip down and smiled faintly. My reflection in the mirror behind the counter showed me plain clothes, tired eyes, calm expression. There was no glitter, no expensive ornaments, no display of wealth, and yet I stood tall, because I knew my worth wasn't written on fabric or stitched into handbags. It was written in my sacrifices, in the education my son carried, in the roof I built brick by brick, in the dignity I refused to lose, even under ridicule. "Would you like to try this one, ma'am?" the saleswoman asked softly, holding out another bottle. Her tone carried none of the pity I had felt earlier from strangers. It carried respect. I nodded, and she sprayed the scent gently onto my wrist. The fragrance was subtle, deep, and strong. Smiled. Behind me, I could still hear my daughter-in-law. Her voice was demanding, "Wrap this, too." "No, not that color. The other one. Do you even know how to pack it properly?" People around her avoided eye contact, their expressions stiff. But she didn't notice. She never noticed. I closed my eyes again and let the perfume linger on my skin. Every note carried memory. Every breath carried resolve. I thought of the years behind me, the sacrifices, the endurance, the silence I carried with pride. And I thought of the moment ahead of me, the moment she still didn't see coming, because soon everything would change. The silence she mocked would turn into the silence that unsettled her most. The dignity she dismissed would rise, undeniable. The calm she mistook for weakness would become her greatest fear. I thanked the saleswoman softly, my voice calm, steady. She bowed her head slightly, her eyes meeting mine with something my daughter-in-law would never understand. Recognition, respect. Stepped away from the counter, my wrist carrying the scent of quiet strength, and as I walked back toward them, I carried with me not just the fragrance, but the weight of truth she was not yet ready to face. The perfume still lingered faintly on my wrist when I returned to the counter. I had not planned to stop again, but something in the saleswoman's eyes made me pause. She whispered to someone behind the counter. A man in a dark suit appeared, moving with brisk steps, yet a polished calm. His badge read Manager. He looked at me, his expression softening instantly. "Madam," he said warmly, bowing slightly. "Welcome back. We've been expecting you." The words floated into the air like a drop in still water. My daughter-in-law's chatter froze mid-sentence. Even my son's silence seemed sharper, and strangers nearby who had not noticed me before turned curiously. Their gazes fell on me, not in dismissal, not in pity, but in something different. Recognition. I stood still, my hands folded calmly in front of me. Inside, my heart remained steady. This was not new, but for them, for her, it was unthinkable. My daughter-in-law let out a nervous laugh, high-pitched, brittle. "Oh, that must be a mistake," she said quickly, tugging at my son's arm. "They probably confuse her with someone else. Happens all the time, doesn't it?" Her words scattered like dry leaves, trying to cover the silence that followed. But the manager stepped forward with certainty. "No, madam," he said again, his voice clear. "There is no mistake." A hush rippled among the passengers nearby. Some whispered softly, some leaned closer, curious. My son shifted uneasily, caught between disbelief and dawning suspicion. His wife, however, wore a forced smile, her eyes darting around, desperate for escape. I did not move. I did not speak, because silence had become my shield, and now, my power. The manager gestured toward a young staff member. She hurried forward, her hands clasped neatly, her posture respectful. "Please," the manager continued, "allow us to escort you. The lounge has been prepared as usual." He extended his hand, waiting. I saw the flicker in my daughter-in-law's eyes, confusion, irritation, then something else, fear. Because for the first time, the script was no longer hers. "Oh, there must be some misunderstanding," she tried again, louder this time, as if volume could bend reality. She's just... She stopped, realizing all eyes were now on her. Her confidence faltered, and I simply turned my head, watching her without a word. The staff did not look at her, not once. Their attention remained fixed on me, unwavering. The young woman who had come forward spoke softly, almost reverently. "Madam, your preferred seating has been arranged. Would you like us to take your bags?" Bags, I had none. But the irony was sharp. For all the branded bags in my daughter-in-law's arms, none were offered respect. She clutched them tighter, as though afraid someone might take them. Passengers passing by slowed their steps. Some stopped entirely, pretending to glance at displays, but really watching the scene unfold. And in that moment, the contrast was undeniable. Her loud pride, my quiet presence, her performance, my truth. My son finally cleared his throat. His voice was low, uncertain. "Mother, what is going on?" He asked it softly, almost as though speaking the question aloud might break something fragile. But I only gave him a faint smile. Not yet. The time for answers had not arrived. The manager bowed again, his movements fluid, practiced. We were informed of your arrival. Please allow us to extend every courtesy, as always. His words carried weight, a weight my daughter-in-law could not ignore, though she tried to laugh again. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, her voice cracking. "They're just being polite to an old woman, that's all. Politeness." But even she heard the hollowness of her defense, because this was not politeness. It was recognition, and recognition cannot be faked. The staff member stepped closer, lowering her tone but not her reverence. "Your private lounge is waiting, madam." Her words fell like a stone in still water, sending ripples through the crowd. "Private lounge?" someone whispered nearby. "Who is she?" another murmured. My daughter-in-law's smile cracked entirely now. Her hands gripped the shopping bags until her knuckles whitened. She turned sharply to my son. "Say something. Tell them it's a mistake." But he did not. His eyes were on me, searching, questioning, remembering. And in that silence, I felt the years press against us, the sacrifices he never knew, the choices I had buried, the truth I had carried quietly, while he built his life. I lifted my chin slightly, not speaking, not denying, because sometimes silence reveals more than words ever can. The manager, sensing my stillness, gave a respectful nod. "There is no rush, madam. When you are ready, we will escort you." With that, he stepped back, allowing me space, the kind of space given not out of courtesy, but out of deference. I let the moment stretch. My daughter-in-law shifted uneasily, her face pale despite the layers of makeup. The arrogance that had fueled her words earlier was crumbling piece by piece. For the first time, she was the one who looked small. I glanced at my wrist, where the perfume lingered. Its scent was calm, steady, enduring. And so was I, around us. Whispers grew louder. "Who is she? Someone important? Look at the staff. They know her." Each word wrapped tighter around my daughter-in-law, suffocating her pride. She pulled at my son again. "Let's go," she hissed. "This is embarrassing. Let's just go." But his feet did not move, and I remained still. Because I knew. This was only the beginning. The silence that once made me invisible now made me unignorable. The truth was approaching, step by step, inevitable, and she had no idea how close it was. The counter gleamed under the warm lights, rows of perfumes and jewelry sparkling like captured stars. I stood quietly, hands folded, as the manager reached beneath the glass. When his hand emerged, it carried a small velvet box, deep red, stitched perfectly at the corners. He placed it before me with both hands, bowing slightly. And then, from the inside pocket of his suit, he drew out a key card, sleek and black, with a golden crest embossed across it. The silence that followed was heavy. He raised his voice just enough for those nearby to hear. "Your private lounge is ready, madam. Allow us to escort you." Gasps rippled through the passengers standing around. Some stopped in their tracks, some leaned forward, whispering, "She must be a VIP. Who is she? Did you hear? Private lounge." The words spread quickly, weaving into the crowd like fire through dry leaves. My daughter-in-law's lips parted slightly, but no sound came. Her carefully painted smirk, the one she had worn all morning, faded into shock. Her fingers twitched against the glossy shopping bags, the logos no longer. Shields of pride, but weights dragging her down. My son, however, said nothing. He stared at the velvet box, then the key card, then at me, Confusion clouded his face, his lips pressed together, searching for words. I said nothing. I moved nothing, because power, when real, does not need to announce itself. The manager remained poised, patient. "Madam," he repeated gently, "your suite has been prepared. As always. As always." The words struck harder than anything else because they carried history, familiarity. This was not a first, not a mistake. This was routine. Passengers were no longer pretending to browse. They were openly watching now, their curiosity pulling them. Closer, eyes slid over me, but with a different light than before. Not dismissal, not pity, recognition, respect. I turned slightly, enough to see the reflection in the glass counter. There she was, my daughter-in-law, standing rigid, her face pale beneath her painted confidence. The arrogance she carried like armor was gone. In its place, disbelief. She tried to laugh again, but it came out strangled. This is crazy," she muttered, forcing the words through clenched teeth. They're just exaggerating for effect. They do this to all customers, right?" The staff did not even glance at her. Their eyes remained on me. Their silence was answer enough. The young assistant stepped forward, lowering her voice but not her reverence. "Shall I arrange for your preferred beverages, madam? The chef has already been notified of your arrival." Her tone was steady, polished, but there was something more, something careful, like one addresses not a customer, but someone far beyond. My daughter-in-law's hands trembled against the bags. Her eyes darted between me, the staff, the crowd. She was searching for an explanation, an escape, a way to hold on to the story she had built for herself, but every second it slipped further away. "Private lounge?" someone near the perfume counter whispered. "Only for the most elite." "Do you think she's a diplomat? A business owner?" Their murmurs filled the space, wrapping tighter and tighter around her. My son finally found his voice, though faint. "Mother." Why do they know you like this?" he asked softly, almost pleading, as if the truth frightened him more than the mystery. I gave him no answer. Instead, I lifted the velvet box with calm hands, the fabric cool against my skin. The manager opened it for me. Inside lay a small emblem, golden, engraved with the same crest as the key card. Recognition, proof, power, condensed into metal and velvet. The crowd leaned closer, though none dared step too near. My daughter-in-law's breath hitched, she whispered, to herself, as though denial could still rewrite what her eyes saw. No, it can't be. But it was. The manager placed the key card atop the box, bowing once more. "Your car is waiting, madam. We will escort you whenever you wish, in day." Tone carried no doubt, no hesitation, only certainty. And in that certainty, the ground shifted beneath her. The perfume scent on my wrist lingered, subtle yet unmistakable. I let the silence hang, because sometimes silence speaks louder than revelation. My daughter-in-law finally snapped, her voice sharp, desperate. "This is insane. She's just an old woman. You're all mistaken." But even as she spoke, her words felt hollow, falling flat in the weight of truth. The staff did not flinch. The crowd did not believe her, and my son. He no longer looked at her at all. His eyes were fixed on me. I turned toward the staff, offering a faint nod. They bowed in unison, and in that small gesture, the whispers rose again. Who is she? She must be powerful. Important. Very important. The murmurs swelled, wrapping around us like a tide that could not be stopped. My daughter-in-law clutched at my son's arm, her voice trembling now. "Say something. Stop this. Why is everyone acting like she's someone important?" But he did not move. His silence was heavier than mine. The manager gestured politely, his movements deliberate. Madam, shall we? He held the key card as though it were a crown, waiting only for me to claim it, and I remained still, because true power is not in taking, but in choosing when to take. The crowd's whispers grew, their eyes burning with curiosity, admiration, envy. Every second, her pride cracked further until all that remained was fear. Fear of the truth. Fear of me. I closed the velvet box slowly, the click of its clasp echoing louder than her protests. Then I lifted my chin, steady and silent, because I knew this moment was only the beginning. The reveal had come. The reckoning would follow. The air around the counter had shifted. Whispers swirled, glances lingered, and the scent of perfumes mingled with tension thick enough to choke. The velvet box rested in my hands. The key card gleamed like a secret that refused to stay hidden. The staff stood poised, patient, their respect palpable. The crowd pressed closer, curiosity sharpening like knives, and then her voice cracked the air. "Oh, she's just my husband's mother," my daughter-in-law stammered, her words jagged and rushed. She gave a tight, forced laugh, the kind that sounds more like panic than amusement. She doesn't understand these things. You know, perfumes, lounges, all this luxury." Her voice trailed off, searching desperately for laughter, for agreement, for anything that could soften the weight of the truth pressing down. But none came. Instead, silence greeted her. The manager did not glance her way. The staff did not nod in politeness. Their gazes remained on me, unflinching, unwavering, unmistakable. Around us, travelers had stopped pretending to shop. Some leaned against counters. Some stood openly, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, and in every glance, directed at her, I saw it. Disgust. Her arrogance, once a shield, had shattered. What remained was pitiful. A woman clawing for control where none existed. Her hands clutched the glossy shopping bags tighter, the logos crumpling under her trembling fingers. "Really," she pressed on, louder now, desperate to convince herself as much as anyone else. "She's just old-fashioned. She doesn't know the value of things here." The words spilled out too fast, too brittle, cracking under their own weight. A murmur cut through the air. How can she talk about her mother-in-law like that? Shameless, disrespectful. The crowd's whispers, once curious, had shifted. No longer speculation about who I was. Now they were judgment against her. Her eyes darted wildly, scanning faces, searching for one ally. There were none. Every glance pierced her pride. Every whisper chipped at her image. Every silence condemned her. My son stood rigid, his face pale, his lips pressed thin. I could see it, the shame crawling across his skin, burning into his chest. His eyes refused to meet mine, but they refused to leave her either, and in that trapped gaze, the weight of his silence crushed him. "Madam," the manager spoke again, calm and firm, as though her voice had never existed. "Your car is ready. We can escort you immediately." The dignity in his tone was like a blade. It cut her words in half, rendering them meaningless before they even left her tongue. She tried again, her voice shrill now, cracking under the strain. "This is ridiculous. She's nobody. She's just—" But the look she received from a stranger nearby stopped her cold. A middle-aged traveler, elegant in her simplicity, folded her arms and spoke loud enough for the circle to hear. "You should be ashamed. That woman deserves your respect. Anyone can see it." The words landed like a slap. Gasps fluttered around. Some nodded. Some murmured agreement. The judgment was no longer whispered. It was public. My daughter-in-law's face flushed deep red. She opened her mouth to retort, but nothing came. Her pride, her voice, her armor, all gone. What remained was raw humiliation, and my son. He lowered his head, his fists clenching at his sides. The shame in his silence screamed louder than her protests. I stood still, watching, listening. I did not need to speak, because power reveals itself not through shouting, but through silence that others cannot ignore. The staff's composure never faltered. They moved with precision, each step, each bow, each word reinforcing the truth she had tried so desperately to bury. Their respect for me was undeniable, unshakable. Her denial could not survive it. The perfume counter clerk approached quietly, placing a ribboned bag on the counter. "Your usual, madam," she said with a small bow. "The fragrance you prefer has been prepared. Another cut, another proof, another reminder." The crowd leaned closer, their eyes heavy on my daughter-in-law, and she wilted beneath them. Her shoulders hunched, her lips trembled. Every attempt to cover herself only buried her deeper. My son finally spoke, his voice hoarse, raw. "Enough." Just one word. But it silenced her. He did not defend her. He did not excuse her, and in that single word he revealed his shame. Not for me, but for her. Her eyes widened, wet with the sting of betrayal. But it wasn't betrayal. It was truth. The truth he could no longer run from. The manager extended his hand toward me once more. "Madam, shall we proceed?" The circle of travelers parted instantly, a path opening. Their eyes followed me, not with pity, not with disdain, but with reverence. And her, she stood frozen, humiliated before them all. Her arrogance crumbled into dust at her feet. I lifted the velvet box closer to me, the gold crest gleaming in the light. And without a word, I stepped forward. The staff moved in unison, their presence forming a quiet wall between me and the chaos she had created. Behind me, whispers rose again. But this time, every word was hers to carry. Cruel woman. Ungrateful. How could anyone treat family like that? Each syllable pressed against her, branding her with the judgment of strangers, a judgment she could not escape. Her pride had promised her the stage, but her humiliation stole it away. Now she was nothing more than a spectacle, and I was the silence that consumed her. The lounge entrance gleamed ahead, the polished glass reflecting the crowd that had gathered behind us. The manager still stood at my side, his hand gesturing toward the open door, waiting for me to move forward, but I paused, because now it was time. For too long my silence had been my shield. I had let her words brush against me like the wind. I had let the whispers sting without response. I had chosen quiet dignity over confrontation, but there are moments when silence speaks too much and words must be spoken. I turned. Slowly, the movement alone drew everyone's attention. My eyes met theirs, not the crowd's, not the staff's, only two faces. My son, my daughter-in-law. She looked as though the ground had betrayed her, shifting beneath her feet. Her lips trembled, her eyes wide, darting from me to the gawking strangers. He looked broken, guilt heavy on his shoulders, shame pressing. Against his jaw so tightly he could not lift his chin. When I spoke, my voice was not loud, but it carried. It cut through the murmurs, the whispers, the unease. Some things may be too expensive. My words were measured, calm. Her breath caught. His eyes flickered upward, stunned. I let the silence linger, let it build, let it press down until even the air seemed to still. Then I finished. But not for me. The crowd shifted. Some leaned in, some held their breath. The words were not angry, they were not bitter, but they carried weight, they carried years, they carried truth. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her pride, so quick to strike before, faltered now. Her throat closed around excuses, the heat of humiliation choking them back. Her eyes darted to her husband. She pleaded without speaking. Say something. Defend me. Save me. But he remained still, silent. And in his silence, she understood. There was no shield left, no excuse strong enough, no laughter sharp enough to cut through this moment. Her power over him was unraveling, thread by thread, before her very eyes. I stepped forward, the velvet box still in my hand. I never spoke, I said softly, my gaze steady. Not because I couldn't, but because I chose not to. My words wrapped around her, each syllable deliberate. I watched, I listened, I endured. Her hands clenched tighter around her shopping bags, knuckles pale, her composure slipping like water through trembling fingers. I turned slightly, my eyes falling on my son now. And you. He flinched. The crowd seemed to lean closer, their breaths caught between us. You forgot, I said simply. His lips parted, a whisper escaping. Mother. But nothing more. You forgot the nights I worked with bleeding hands so you could study. You forgot the mornings I went without food so you would not go hungry. You forgot the sacrifices that carved your path. Each word pressed into him, not with anger, but with truth too heavy to deny. His eyes filled, shame drowning them, and still, he did not speak. Then, finally, I let my gaze return to her. You thought I was nothing. You thought silence meant weakness. You thought respect was something you could demand. Her lips trembled. She shook her head slightly, as if denial alone could erase the crowd's piercing stares. But her voice was gone. I lifted the keycard between my fingers, its golden edge catching the light. Respect, I said quietly, is not bought in stores. It is not found in brands. It is not worn for display. The manager bowed slightly, affirming every word without meaning to. The crowd murmured, and she stood, exposed. Her pride had been her crown. Now it was ashes. My son lowered his gaze fully, tears glistening at the corners. He tried to speak, tried to form words, but guilt strangled them before they escaped. And I did not need them, because silence, once again, told me everything. I shifted the velvet box under my arm, straightened my shoulders, and gave my final words. Things may be too expensive, I repeated, my voice unwavering. Respect, loyalty, gratitude. Her breath hitched, his shoulders caved. But not for me. And with that, I turned away. The staff moved, the crowd parted, the lounge doors opened. I stepped through, leaving them behind, her humiliation heavy on her skin, his silence burning into his soul. Outside, the whispers rose again, chasing them. Instead of me, ungrateful woman, such a mother and such a son, shameful. The words stuck to them like shadows, and neither could answer, because truth had spoken, and it did not need to speak twice. The doors to the private lounge opened with a soft, elegant hush. For a moment, everything around me felt still. The busy hum of the airport, the chatter of passengers, the rush of footsteps, all muted beneath the weight of what had just happened. The manager extended his hand, not as a command, but as an honor, waiting for me to step forward. I did not rush. I did not stumble. I walked. Every step was measured, slow but steady, carrying not just my body but my years, my struggles, my sacrifices. And now, finally, my dignity. An attendant took my modest luggage from my hand as if it were treasure. Another bowed slightly, guiding me toward the gleaming corridor that led to the private lounge reserved only for the few. Behind me, I could feel the stairs, dozens of them, passengers who had seen everything. Whispers rose, hushed yet sharp, carried like a breeze through the waiting area. Who is she? Did you hear? They called her Madam. She must be someone important. Look, how they treat her. I did not turn back. I didn't need to, because I knew exactly where those whispers were falling, on the two faces left behind. My daughter-in-law stood frozen, her expensive shopping bags hanging lifeless in her grip, her painted smile long erased. Her pride, her arrogance, the superiority she flaunted, it had shattered in front of strangers. And my son. He stood beside her, but he looked smaller than ever. His shoulders hunched, his head bowed. The shame was heavier than any luggage he could carry. The staff did not glance at them. The crowd did not part for them. They were just ordinary passengers now, waiting in line, exposed, humiliated. I walked forward. The red carpet laid before the lounge door caught the light, soft beneath my steps. The attendants moved with practiced grace, one at each side, another just behind me, forming a quiet procession. It was not wealth they were escorting. It was dignity, and that dignity was mine. Chatoi. Crowd shifted, clearing a path. Strangers who had moments ago seen me as an old woman to be mocked now stepped aside, eyes lowered, as if my silence commanded respect more than any word could. And I thought, this is what she never understood. Respect cannot be bought. Status cannot be faked. Dignity cannot be stolen. It is earned. The glass doors to the lounge drew closer, reflecting me as I approached. I saw myself in them, not the frail figure she once sneered at, not the cheap clothes she mocked, but a woman who had endured, sacrificed, and risen above. I saw my years etched on my face, but now they looked like strength, not weakness. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled. Just before stepping through, I let myself pause, not for hesitation, but because I knew the silence behind me was louder than any outburst could ever be. I could feel her burning gaze, desperate, frantic, clawing at the air for control she no longer had. I could feel his regret, heavy, pressing into him until even breathing must have felt like guilt. I didn't need to see them, because humiliation does not need witnesses. It lives inside. The manager's voice broke the silence. "Madam, your lounge is ready. May I escort you to your seat?" His tone was soft, respectful, unquestioning. I gave him a small nod, and with that the doors opened wide. The air inside was cooler, calmer. Plush chairs, golden lamps, the scent of fresh flowers, the quiet world. Of those who had earned or inherited power. But none of that mattered to me. What mattered was behind me. Two people left to face a crowd's judgment. Two people stripped of the illusion they wore so proudly. Two people who now understood the cost of forgetting where they came from. As I walked deeper into the lounge, attendants bowed again, offering drinks, refreshments, assistance. Their gestures were polite, but to me they were symbols, not of wealth, not of luxury, but of recognition. Recognition of a life lived with sacrifice. Recognition of battles fought in silence. Recognition of dignity that no insult could erase. For a moment, I closed my eyes and breathed. The noise outside was gone, and yet I knew they were still standing there. He with his silence, she with her humiliation, passengers glancing, whispering, judging, and all of it, every stare, every murmur, was a reflection of what they had lost, not what I had gained, because dignity was never theirs to take. It had always been mine. I let the velvet box rest on the table beside me. The golden key card lay next to it, glinting softly under the lounge light. Symbols not of wealth, but of doors I could enter at will. I thought of the years when doors had been closed to me, when I had been too poor, too tired, too burdened to step anywhere with pride. And now, here I was, not because of them, not for them, but despite them. I sipped the tea the attendant placed before me, its warmth steadying my hands. Outside, life continued. Boarding calls, luggage wheels, hurried footsteps. But for them, time had stopped, because some moments brand you forever, and this was theirs. The lesson had been given, not in anger, not in revenge, but in dignity. I had not shouted, I had not struck back, I had only walked, and that walk was enough. The lounge was quiet, too quiet compared to the chaos of the terminal outside. The glass walls muted the rushing footsteps, the boarding announcements, the murmur of crowds. Here, the air was still, cool, scented faintly with jasmine from the fresh flowers arranged neatly on the tables. I lowered myself into a soft leather chair. For the first time, in what felt like years, I wasn't being looked at with pity or mocked with disdain. Here, I wasn't an old burden, I was Madam. The staff moved around me with precision and grace. A silver tray was placed before me, holding tea in fine porcelain, biscuits arranged like artwork, and a glass of water. The velvet box and golden key card still sat where they had been placed, symbols, shining reminders of everything that had just unfolded. But more than the luxury, it was the silence I treasured. Silence, after years of being spoken over. Silence, after hours of cruel words from a daughter-in-law who never once understood the weight of sacrifice. Silence, after the humiliation of being told I was not good enough. This silence was not empty. It was full. It was victory. I sat back, letting the steam from the tea rise to my face, and my mind wandered. I remembered the nights when I stayed awake stitching clothes under dim light just to pay school fees. I remembered selling my jewelry, each bangle, each necklace, piece by piece, to buy books, uniforms, tuition. I remembered my son's first graduation day. How proud I was, even when my hands were bare, wrists empty, ears unadorned. And now, that same son stood outside, too ashamed to meet my eyes. A faint smile touched my lips. Not of cruelty, not of triumph, but of truth. Because in the end, I realized something very important. I didn't need to explain my worth. Not to him, not to her, not to anyone. My worth had already spoken, through my actions, through the respect strangers now gave me, through the silence that had turned into a roar. Outside, through the glass, I could see the shadows of the crowd still lingering. Some passengers had not moved on, still curious about the scene that had unfolded, and I saw them too, my son and his wife. She was pacing, her arms crossed tight over her chest, her lips moving fast and sharp as she hissed words into his ear. Even from here, I could see the fury burning in her eyes, the humiliation clawing at her pride. He, however, stood still, silent, his head lowered, his shoulders drooped. His face carried a weight I knew too well, guilt, a guilt he would carry long after this day. I turned away, because it was no longer mine to carry. For years, I had carried the burden of proving myself, of explaining myself, of justifying why I deserved a little respect. But not anymore. They could stand outside, drenched in shame, plotting, regretting, fighting amongst themselves. That was their burden now, mine was gone. I lifted the teacup slowly, savoring the warmth in my hand, and took a sip. The taste was simple, just tea, nothing extravagant, but it felt like the sweetest thing I had tasted in years, because I was drinking it in peace, not in tears, not in insult, not in silence forced by fear, but in silence chosen. The attendants moved softly, discreetly, ensuring my comfort. Yet not one of them asked me to explain who I was. Not one of them doubted my presence here. Respect does not ask questions. Respect does not need proof. It simply exists when it is deserved. And I had deserved this for a long time. I let myself rest back into the chair, watching the light play against the polished tables. I thought about what might come next, whether my son would ever apologize, whether she would ever soften her heart. But strangely, I found that I did not care. For the first time, their choices, their words, their cruelty, none of it mattered. Because I had finally remembered something I had long forgotten. I had power too. Not power in wealth, not power in influence, but power in dignity. Time passed slowly in the lounge, though outside, I knew their flight would soon be called. I wondered if they would sit far from me on the plane, avoiding the stares of strangers who now looked at them with disgust. I wondered if she would spend the journey whispering poison into his ear, trying to rebuild the pride she had lost in public. I wondered if he would even listen, or if his silence would stretch further, becoming a wall she could never break through. But all those thoughts drifted away as I looked once more at the velvet box and the keycard, symbols not of revenge, but of choice. My choice to walk in silence. My choice to leave behind what no longer deserved me. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, hearing nothing but the gentle hum of the lounge air conditioning, and when I opened them, I knew the story was complete. Not because they had been humiliated, not because I had been honored, but because I had walked away. The announcements outside echoed faintly through the glass. Boarding calls, flight numbers, destinations. Life was moving forward. So was I. They left me with nothing but insults. Yet, in the end, I left them behind, with silence. If you felt the weight of this story, if you've ever been underestimated, insulted, or left behind, remember, silence and dignity are sometimes the loudest answers. More stories like this are waiting for you here. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next twist, the next heartbreak, the next powerful ending, because every story hides a lesson, and every lesson hides a story.